Okay, well, let's get started here, and then we're going to introduce our next speaker is Mr. Stanton Friedman. Ladies and gentlemen, he came all the way from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, just to be with you today. In case you have any doubts about UFOs, be prepared to lose them, because he has a lot of information to share. He's one of the most world-renowned UFO researchers, and he's been in this for many, many years. He's been on countless television shows, documentaries, radio interviews, has written many books, and he has his books out there for sale. So once we take the break, and after Stanton Friedman, we'll be having a lunch break for approximately an hour. So, you know, feel free to go ahead and shop around outside as well as for lunch, and we'll be back. So I'll be announcing that after his presentation. But ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now introduce Mr. Stanton Friedman.
Thank you. I must apologize. I sold almost all my books yesterday at the library. Seems appropriate place to sell books, I guess. But so I wish I could sell you. I wish I had another case. I sold 2 large cases of books. Wonderful. That's the wonderful people in Del Rio. There's a new book out called Alien Universe, and I am described in it as a physicist and avid ufologist. You can't say nuclear physicist, you understand. And I'll be doing one of my monthly MUFON Journal columns about the book and how bad it is. The guy's got 500 publications as a physicist, and he can't get his facts straight about flying saucers. Not surprising, it's not the first time that's happened. The key rule, if you're going to express an opinion as a scientist, and I do have bachelor's and master's degrees in physics from the University of Chicago, and I spent 14 years working in industry on a wide variety of advanced, highly classified, eventually canceled programs. I set a record for working on canceled programs, I think. Little companies like GE, GM, Westinghouse, McDonnell Douglas, TRW Systems. As a scientist, supposedly, you don't express opinions unless you have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear. That should be the rule. Unfortunately, it isn't. I gave my first lecture in 1967, more than 750 lectures since, and I still find that there are many scientists who believe in giving their opinion without having any facts in hand. Because you see, if there were any facts to have, they would already have them. It goes with the arrogance of today's world. So what I want to try to do, put in a plug for the book, obviously, and I can't sell you one, but there is an order blank, you can order it, and they all get autographed and all the rest of that. It's okay. Is go over some of the important evidence. And there are several areas in which the nasty, noisy negativists, which is what I call them when I'm being polite, several areas in which they get everything wrong. One is there is no evidence. You never hear them talk about the 5 large-scale scientific studies. Second is governments can't cover anything up. They never show you the blacked out documents. Look at the big programs on which billions have been spent in secret. We don't want to talk about any of that, you see. Another area, this is a surprising one. They don't know anything about advanced propulsion systems. And you'll hear some really strange things out of these guys. You got to pay attention. And there are references in the book. You know, tell you where to go. Well, that's a leading thing to say, but anyway, to find facts about flying saucers. All right. Biggest study ever done for the United States government. Project Blue Book, Special Report number 14. Boy, that color doesn't look like blue to me, but The work was done by Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, major research and development firm, under contract to the United States Air Force. They looked at 3,201 sightings. They did quality evaluations, categorizations, 240 charts, tables, graphs, and maps. Drive you up the wall looking at all the data in the thing. They didn't distribute a copy, but they put out a press release in which supposedly this is the Secretary of the Air Force. This press release went all over the place. You see the date, 25 October 1955. Boy, that's a long time ago. We already had enough data to convince any sensible person that some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Remember, the right question isn't, what are UFOs? The question is, are any intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft? My answer is yes. That's why I use the term flying saucers. All flying saucers are UFOs. Not all UFOs are flying saucers. All great-grandfathers are men. Not all men are great-grandfathers. I happen to be one, incidentally. I take pride in that. On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I feel certain that even the unknown 3%, notice that, 3%, could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been obtained. That went all over the world, and nobody batted an eye. It's a total lie. The unknowns were not 3%. Now, the press release was cleverly done. They didn't mention the title of the report. If they'd said Blue Book Special Report 14, surely somebody would have said, wait a minute, what do you mean 14? What happened to 1 through 13? Oh, they were all classified. They weren't going to say that. So it went out. But what are the facts? This is a breakdown, BBSR, Blue Book Special Report 14. And you will notice there are the unknowns. Whoops, wrong way. That doesn't look like a 3 to me. Not even a rounded off 3. The unknowns weren't 3%, they were 21.5%. Now, I call that a blatant lie from the Secretary of the Air Force. It's not, well, he was a little careless with the numbers. If he'd said 4%, maybe I'd let him get away with it. 21.5 is not close to 3. Equally important, if you look at the next to the last category here, insufficient information. He said they could have explained the 3% if more data had been available. If there wasn't enough data, by definition in the study, it was listed as insufficient information. Complete lie. They also did a cross-comparison between unknowns and knowns. Probability that the unknowns were just misknowns, less than 1%. Not close, less than 1%. They did a quality evaluation of all the sightings. You'll see that in a minute. And you'll see that the better the quality of the sighting, because of the background of the observer, the more likely to be listed as an unknown. Now, the guys who did the study had a rule. No sighting could be listed as an unknown unless all 4 of the final report evaluators agreed it was an unknown. Any 2 could label it anything else, aircraft, balloon, astronomical, etc. Notice that term psychological is really psychological aberration. 1.5%. The American Physical Society, to which I and most physicists belong, says that 2% of the papers submitted to it are crackpot papers. There are more crackpots associated with physics than there are with flying saucers. I'm one of the few with a foot in each camp, you'll understand. So let's get rid of the mythology, in other words. Now, there's a breakdown by quality. 35% of the excellent sightings couldn't be explained. 35%. If you were looking for a cure for cancer and somebody said, I guess there isn't one because only 35% of the best drugs work, I'd say, fine, I'm sick, give me the drug. What do I care about the ones that, don't work, etc. But there are facts here, in other words. Largest study ever done, 3,201 cases, so we've got good statistics here. Drive you up the wall looking through the report with all the charts, tables, graphs, maps. Two other sources of information. UFO evidence on the left, collected by members of NICAP, the old National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. About 18% of the 3,500 cases they looked at couldn't be explained. Nobody's ever heard of it. The one on the right, Symposium on Unidentified Flying Objects. The symposium was held on my birthday. It was held on that day, but July 29th. 6 scientists testified in person, 6 more of us in writing only. The written testimony of all 12 is included in this 247-page volume. Outstanding collection of papers by scientists. I'm the only one without a PhD in the whole volume. I was also the youngest, so I think I'm the only one who's still alive who did that. Hard to tell now. The best paper by far is one by the late Dr. James E. McDonald, a professor of physics at the University of Arizona. Jim had guts enough to talk to over 500 witnesses. 41 of his best cases are included in his testimony. Multiple witness radar visual cases, sightings by astronomers, by pilots, by meteorologists. Outstanding collection of cases. I strongly recommend the report, and I understand you can get it on the internet if you look hard enough for it. And I mention this one because there were hearings in 2013, pseudo-congressional hearings. There were a panel of ex-congressmen. They got paid, 6 of them got paid $25,000 each to spend the week in Washington. I didn't get paid anything to spend the week in Washington. I did testify. I think they came away impressed that there was good, solid information here that they didn't know about before they came there. But they recommended, believe it or not, that we go to the United Nations instead of the Congress. I understand Congress is not held in high repute. I'm not knocking anybody, but you probably have heard that as well. But I also provided testimony at the United Nations. And we were very well received back in the late 70s. But the US put the kibosh on doing anything about following up to get an international collecting of data, etc. So, everything goes round and round, I guess. How many people have read the UFO evidence? Raise your hand if you have. Hey, we got one. How many have read the congressional hearings document? 1. No, our percentages aren't very high, but it's a long time ago. University of Colorado study, mistitled, but it's 965 pages and they spent $539,000. This is the infamous University of Colorado study, the so-called Condon report. And if you read the press releases, when this came out in early '69, you'll find that nothing to flying saucers, says Condon. No point in doing more work, etc. Totally negative. However, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, the world's largest group of space scientists, set up a UFO subcommittee. I'm a member of the AIA. They wouldn't let me on the committee because I had reached a conclusion already. After 11 years of study, one would hope so. Anyway, they put out a quiet little story in the journal. they found, and on the basis of this report, one could come to the opposite conclusions from Dr. Condon's. Any phenomenon with 30% unknowns is worthy of further investigation. The press didn't tell you that. And I know people who were turned on to UFOs by reading the Condon report. Incidentally, it's got a whole section on government involvement in UFO investigations. There's no mention of Blue Book Special Report 14. Covered 20 times as many cases. You say, well, maybe he didn't know about it. I know he knew about it because I wrote him about it and got an acknowledgement back. Thank you for sending the information which you provided. So this is a crazy world we live in. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. There are 4 basic rules for debunkers. That's one of them. Second is what the public doesn't know. I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. Nobody will know the difference. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble. And if you listen to the debunkers, you know, the question is settled. Nothing of flying saucers. They're wrong. Dr. J. Allen Hynek's book, you know, I see astronomers writing about UFOs negatively. They seem to avoid Dr. Hynek's book. Why does that matter? Because for 20 years he was Project Blue Book scientific consultant on UFOs. He was chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University. Don't you think you should go to the guy who was there? Oh, don't bother us. How many have read Dr. Hynek's book? I see one back there. How many have read the 2? How many have read the Condon report? It's a big book. Take a good paperweight. Now, let me deal just for a bit, just to surprise you. My specialty is working on canceled government-sponsored advanced research and development programs. And contrary to what you hear from the ancient academics, an awful lot of work that goes on in research and development outside the universities. I know that's hard for some people to believe. I've had people tell me if Roswell actually happened, I'm the original civilian investigator, and we'll be talking about it, they would have had to pull half the physicists out of the colleges in the country. Balderdash. Don't they know that there's Los Alamos, there's Oak Ridge, there's Sandia, there's Hanford, there's Lockheed and General Electric and all these other places? If you need people who have real talent and security clearances, that's a very important thing. There are plenty of places you could go, right? Some of them in New Mexico, to pull out people who are good at finding out about the unknown. To give you an example, when I was working on nuclear airplanes, apropos of this slide, for General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department, way back in 1958, those are jet engines at the bottom and the reactors inside up top. Our program in 1958 spent $100 million. We employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. It was not 6 professors and 20 grad students. I can hear you. I'm getting an echo back here. I hope somebody can hear me. And that wasn't the biggest program around. And no, we didn't successfully fly nuclear-powered airplanes. We built some test systems. We needed a little bit of leadership. Unfortunately, we didn't have any. Here's what a flight vehicle would look like. The reactor is inside here. Hot air comes in, gets heated in the reactor instead of being burned with fuel. gets kicked out through the turbines, and away you go. It would have a major advantage: unlimited range, thousands of hours of flying. You replace the pilots once in a while, but that was in 1958. This is a nuclear-powered ramjet, Ling Temco Vought, actually here in Texas. And the idea of this little baby is you'd carry it aboard a B-52 and load it up with H-bombs. You can fly it any place on the planet and kill somebody, besides the pilot. The program didn't get very far, but they spent a lot of money too. Money was no object because this was Cold War times. If we can do anything that'll beat the Russians, let's do it. And the Russians are probably laughing their heads off at those stupid Americans spending all that money on far-out stuff. Nuclear rocket engines. These are the good ones. Different models. There are three major companies that were involved: Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab, Aerojet General, and Los Alamos National Laboratory. Slightly different configurations and stuff. And these are just, sketches, drawings, but we did build and operate some. Here's the basic idea that cold liquid hydrogen comes in, goes down, goes around, it comes out very hot through the nozzle. Over 4,000 degrees. And we successfully operated a number of these systems on the ground. I worked on this one for Westinghouse. Reactors inside here. These are all built so that you can remotely move them because they get quite radioactive after a while. So you move them into and out of a special assembly building. On the power level of this baby, the reactor is about this big. 1,100 megawatts. That's half the power of Grand Coulee Dam, which just happens to be a little larger than this. That was the Westinghouse one, 1,100 megawatts. Let's look at the Los Alamos one. Their biggest one was 4,400 megawatts. Twice the power of Grand Coulee Dam, less than 8 feet in diameter, and the test was successful. You don't want to be close. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe he's feeding me lunch.
This is for the radio feed. Sorry.
It's not lunch.
It's a heater.
It could.
Go ahead.
This is taken from a distance. Area 51 is in the background somewhere. Can't say where. And those are tanks of liquid hydrogen. And of course the noisy negativists all said you can't use liquid hydrogen, just as there were many American towns that said you couldn't store gasoline, it was much too dangerous back before 1900. Still dangerous, but we're still storing it. It was a big program, it was canceled, naturally. If I worked on it, it was canceled. Now, these are all fission systems, F-I-S-S-I-O-N. And don't let this sort of stuff scare you. These are nuclear fusion systems, helium-3 and deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. The important thing here, there are many different fusion reactions. Each reaction gives you 18.3 million electron volts in the form of charged particles. And you're probably thinking, so who cares? Well, normal chemical reactions involve a few, less than 20 electron volts of energy. It's a measure of energy. One fusion reaction gives you 18 million electron volts. Now, it should impress you. Partly because, you may not realize it, but the major source of energy throughout the universe, even outside of Texas, is nuclear fusion. That's what goes on in the stars, all of them. Some are hotter than others, some are smaller, older. There's quite a variety. But nuclear fusion is where it's at. Now, we very smart Earthlings figured that out in 1938, theoretically, that maybe that's how the sun produces its energy. Some great scientists thought it was a matter of burning gas. Sun can't last very long, a few million years, because you'd use up all the gas. Well, it's not chemical combustion. It's nuclear fusion. Now, some smart people took advantage of that. We decided when you need a lot of energy, you go nuclear. Whoops. Oh, I thought there was another thing in there, but we'll find it. Nope. Let me go back to the energy, the fusion. The nuclear navy realized a long time ago, right after the war, Admiral Rickover decided that, you know, if we put our heads together, we should be able to make a nuclear-powered submarine. And they did. Submarines during World War II could stay underwater for about a day. They needed oxygen for the diesel engines. Nuclear-powered submarines can go around the world underwater. They take periscope leave when they go by Hawaii, is the word I'm given. Up periscope, look at Hawaii, there's your leave, let's get back underwater, folks. Now, not only did they build nuclear submarines, but they built nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, which can operate for 18 years without refueling. 18 years without stopping at a gas station. That's very impressive, frankly. And as you would expect from us Earthlings, naturally when it came to explosions, killing people, that's where the money went. So look at the progression. In 1944, a big bomb was a 10-ton blockbuster. Took a big B-29 to carry it. 10 tons of dynamite. Make a pretty big hole in the ground, too. Our first atomic bomb over at Trinity site, New Mexico, 1945, about 16,000 tons of TNT, energy release equivalent. So we go from 10 to 16,000, and being really smart guys, in 1952, first H-bomb, first fusion device. We upped the ante. We went from 10 to 16,000 to 10 million tons of TNT equivalent in one bomb. The Russians outdid us a few years later. Their big bomb, 57 million tons of TNT, energy release equivalent. You drop that in the middle of New Jersey and you'd start fires from New York to Philadelphia. Having grown up in New Jersey, I know some people might think that's not a bad idea, but what I'm trying to say is these are incredible amounts of energy under our control. I don't know if you realize it or not, but we Earthlings have exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons. Only 2 on people, thank goodness. And there are plenty of them sitting around now. And there are plenty of idiots out there who'd like to use them too. So we're already deep into the nuclear age. And people say, why would anybody come to planet Earth? Why don't they land on a White House lawn? It's a no-fly zone, for one thing. Second thing, the President of the United States doesn't speak for 7 billion Earthlings, last I heard. Some people would say he has trouble speaking for 300 million Americans. I'm in the right place to say that. One reason to come here is to quarantine us. Put yourself in the place of an alien. Maybe some of you already, oh, I won't say that. Sorry. The point is this. We're not a very friendly folk. In World War II, and I don't know if they teach this in school, we Earthlings killed 50 million of our own kind. We destroyed 1,700 cities. We are not nice guys. If you were an alien, you wouldn't want us out there. And there were 3 reasons just past the end of the war, let's say in July 1947, why you'd expect that Earthlings would be out there fairly soon, taking their brand of friendship, which everybody else calls hostility, with them. Nuclear weapons, powerful rockets to carry the nuclear weapons and other explosives, and the beginning of the electronics age. Radar didn't exist much before World War II. There's only one place in the world where in July 1947 we could study all 3 of those, southeastern New Mexico, which also happens to be where Roswell is, believe it or not. Trinity Site, first nuclear weapon explosion. White Sands Missile Range, right close by, where we were firing our captured German V-2 rockets, and where we had our best radar, because sometimes the rockets went the wrong way. And you needed the radar to tell you that, whoops, even without bombs, nobody likes rockets dropping in for dinner, so to speak. I had an English astronomer when I was on a program in England. I said, you can see why aliens would be in southeastern New Mexico. He said, well, they could have gone to the Soviet Union. Sorry, they didn't test their first A-bomb until 1949. So New Mexico was the place. And there's a nice museum there, and I'll be there in early July, and Travis will too. Great place. If you haven't visited there, it's great. How many people, just out of curiosity, how many people here have visited Roswell? Oh, quite a few. Okay. Right. Popular place. Gets a little hot in the summertime. I warn you. Okay. Now, never mind a saucer. You see the guys who were driving? Does a nuclear physicist believe in little green men? Well, they're not green, and they are little, whether they're men or women, or both or neither, I don't know. But there are many reports of beings associated with the craft. There's a guy named Ted Phillips in Missouri who has collected more than 5,000 physical trace cases from 80 countries. Cases in which the saucer is seen on Earth, just above the ground, where the saucer lands. And after it leaves, there are physical traces associated with having been there. 1/6 of those cases involve reports of beings associated with the craft on under the ground. Typically little guys. Not crash test dummies, incidentally. You've heard about crash test dummies. A musical group, of course, but there are a lot of them. This is Delphos, Kansas. Ronnie Johnson, age 16, finishing his chores for the evening, looks up, here's this darn saucer sitting a foot or 2 off the ground, about 10 feet in diameter. He's paralyzed, he literally can't move. He's gawking at this thing. This glowing ring of soil, bottom of the tree is glowing, some other stuff. This thing finally takes off. He dashes into the house, tells his parents, they laugh at him. He says, you don't need to believe me, go outside and see it, because it was moving slowly away. And they did go out, and they did see it, and they go back to where he was, and here's this glowing ring of soil. Being curious people, they touch their hands to the soil. Fingers get burned. His mother can't take pulses at the restaurant where she works part-time as a nurse. They call the sheriff. The sheriff comes out the next day, checks for radioactivity. Everybody's worried about radioactivity. Hey, we nuclear guys are okay. Don't worry about it. You're all radioactive. I hate to tell you that, but it's true. Not enough to do you much harm, but it's true anyway. And somebody tells Ted Phillips, who lives in Missouri, there's an article in the paper, he sees it, and Ted goes and talks to the Johnsons. I've been out on the place. He sends me samples of the soil, which I had good test run. Ring soil on the right, normal soil from a few feet away on the left. And don't complain about that sophisticated soil retention device. You can call it a paper plate if you want. I had somebody say he didn't believe anything I said because of that paper plate. I pointed out when I was at the University of Chicago, there was a Nobel Prize-winning physics experiment, which a key piece of equipment was held up by an empty coffee can, which happened to be just the right size. If they can use a coffee can, I can use a paper plate. I had good lab tests run. The ring soil had a much higher level of soluble minerals. It was too salty to grow anything. Down 14 inches. Ain't no way the farmer there could have done something with that. But this is one, as I say, of 5,000 physical trace cases. There is no physical evidence. How many times have I heard that stupid remark? What some people want is if I can bring an alien with me on the stage and cut him and bring out some green blood, then maybe they'd believe me. That's as bad as it gets. Delphos, Kansas. Now, the most famous abduction case, Betty and Barney Hill. The dog is not an alien, he has no part in the story. This happened in 1961, New Hampshire. They'd been over to Canada, were coming back home, heard there was a hurricane coming. They lived down southern part of New Hampshire. They decided they better get home. And Betty spots a strange light. Barney's driving. There's nobody around. This is out in the boonies, September 19th, 1961. And they watch this thing over the hills. They see it go in front of the moon. They keep driving, no traffic. They see it go in right near the old man of the mountain, which was a symbol of New Hampshire. Unfortunately, it fell into a lake, so it's not there anymore. You can't see it, and it was 1.5 times, they figured, the size of the old man of the mountain, which would make it about 72 feet. And can you imagine what the aliens are saying to each other as they go by this geological formation that looks like a person? What are these idiots doing here? Is this a statue to their Lord? Anyway, they keep driving. This thing gets a lot closer, stops right over the road. It's late at night. Barney gets out of the car with binoculars. He's staring at this thing. Big, round, flattened, red lights at the end. Double row of windows. He looks with the binoculars. There's a bunch of guys inside, pulling gears, doing something. And one who was looking at him, it's like they can see each other, through the binoculars kind of thing. Scares the heck out of him. Gets a strong feeling in his head. They're going to be captured. Pulls the binoculars away, actually breaks the strap. He's truly frightened. Dashes back to the car. They take off. There's some beeping sounds, strange vibrations in the car. And then there's another set of beeping sounds. Then they keep driving on their way. Meanwhile, they've done a couple of strange things. They went from a primary road to a secondary road to a tertiary road, which is not something they're Barney would ever do. You know, this is 1961. A mixed marriage was not that common. You worried about your behavior and what you did and where you went and so forth. Now, Betty was a social worker. Barney worked for the post office. It was on the Governor's Civil Rights Commission. Knew a lot of the guys out of Pease Air Force Base. Civil rights was a big issue then. I'm sure it's all settled now, right? I shocked somebody the other day when I said, you know, the Army wasn't desegregated until 1948. You're kidding, I take it. No, I'm not kidding. The world has changed a lot. I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying it's changed a lot. Anyway, they go on home. They had expected to get home about 3 in the morning. Their watches had stopped, and the clock in the kitchen said it was 5 in the morning. This is kind of weird. Betty's dress was torn at the back. Barney's shoes were all scuffed, and he was a meticulous dresser. And I did meet Barney before his death in '69. I saw Betty several times. I've been at their house. And the co-author of a couple of books is Betty's niece, Kathleen Martin. So, know the people. And they've had events. The state of New Hampshire has put a plaque up where this abduction took place. They take it seriously there, to their credit. Anyway, the key point I want to get to is Betty under hypnosis. They're examined in separate rooms. Oh, to fill in the story. They finally decided this missing time was bothering them, and Barney developed ulcers and stuff. And his doctor said, Barney, I can't do anything more for you. I think you ought to see a psychiatrist, because people thought ulcers and pressure and stress and all this kind of thing. And he had to drive a lot of miles every day, and tough. They got to see, fortunately, Dr. Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist, who just happens to have been the world's top expert on what we today call post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Then it was dealing with shell-shock war veterans. You don't hear that term much anymore, it's the same thing. And Dr. Simon knew anything about flying saucers, but he sure knew how to help people who had traumatic experiences. Like your buddy's head being blown off next to you in battle. That's a little hard to get back from. And he worked out techniques. He ran a hospital that had 3,000 beds for shell-shock war veterans. And the Army made a movie, Let There Be Light, starring Ben Simon, explaining how he helped to get people back to be amongst the living again. And I think you're all aware that PTSD hasn't stopped. Plenty of guys came back from Iraq, and Afghanistan with PTSD. Anyway, over a period of several months, hypnotized them each separately 10 times. One of the key things is that under hypnosis, Betty is telling, after they finish examining her, Betty would ask anybody anything. A social worker, family came over in 1640, contrast to Barney's background. His grandfather was a slave incidentally. And she asked the leader, after he'd stopped pain, they stuck a needle in her navel, and she screamed, and the guy waves his hand and the pain stopped, which is kind of neat. She asked, I know you're not from around here, where are you from? The understatement of the month. And so he shows her 2 feet by 2 feet by 3 feet, I'll call it a model, a map, a bunch of points of light, connected by different kinds of lines. And there were 2 base stars close to each other. And she says, well, where are you on the map? Wise guy alien says, probably telepathically, well, do you know where you are on the map? I don't know anything about astronomy. Well, how can I tell you where I'm from if you don't know where you're at? End of discussion. You can imagine what's going inside Dr. Simon's head listening to this. He's taping all these sessions. He asked Betty if she can remember the map. She says yes. He gives her a post-hypnotic suggestion. Draw it later on, which she does, and it's in the book, the first book, The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. And the only trouble is we have no idea what it means. Until a few years later, a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish did something nobody else had ever done. She built a total of more than 20 different three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood. The idea was to see if we can find a three-dimensional pattern that matched this two-dimensional pattern. She visited Betty. Tremendous amount of work. Her biggest model had 250 stars in it. You got to get the coordinates for each star. And the astronomers weren't going anywhere, so they didn't care how far away a star was. All you needed was two angles. You can look at a particular star. But if you're going to try to find out where things are, you need real distances. There's Marjorie. She died last April, incidentally. She was a good sculptress, a member of Mensa. You can see how long ago this picture was. Look at the color of my beard and hair and so forth. It was in the early 70s. And she was a sculptress, too. That's what the aliens look like, based on witness testimony. This is her big model, 256 or so stars. She finally figured out which stars were which, was able to identify all the 16 or so in this model. And it tells us where the base stars are. They're the names. The distances have all changed because the Europeans put up a satellite that made millions of measurements of the distances very accurately. So you could check it again. But the important thing is the base stars. I'm trying to give you a sense of perspective here. The base stars are Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. That's the constellation of Reticulum, the net, that means in Latin. It's only 39.3 light years away, those two stars. They're only an eighth of a light year apart. They're 30 times closer to each other than the sun, our star, is to the next star over. We're out in the boonies. I'm not talking about Del Rio, no attachment. These guys got next door neighbors, and oh, by the way, they just happen to be a cool billion years older than the sun. And the other star is visible from a planet around the other one all day long. You have a little more incentive to develop new methods of interstellar travel and that sort of thing when you got a next door neighbor. Anyway, when somebody says, where do you want to go? I say, not to another galaxy. I mean, Andromeda is 2 million light years away. Who cares? If I want coffee, I don't say I'll be back next week because it's a great place down in Sydney, Australia. Get the loaf of bread from the grocery store, my wife says, not from Australia. And the coffee, too. I wrote the first article about the star map work. It appeared in Saga magazine. Everybody remembers Saga magazine. I convinced the editor of Astronomy magazine to do an article. He talked to all the right people. His article got more response than anything they'd ever published before. They published comments for a year. Then they put out this 32-page full-color booklet. They sold 10,000 copies. Unheard of. And then Carl Sagan, my University of Chicago classmate for 3 years, threatened to sue them because his name was on this list of people. And it turned out the publisher had a brain tumor, we didn't know it at the time, and he caved, and I wound up, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I wound up with 18,000 copies of this booklet. All gone. Had it in my garage in California, and then moved to Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. I wish I had 18,000 copies now. Could sell them all. Anyway, great piece of work, very exciting work, and it does give you a sense of perspective. 39 light years isn't that far away. Within 54 light years of here, there are 1,000 stars. That means within 1,000 light years of here, there are about 8 million stars. So why would we worry about going to another galaxy? A couple 100 billion stars in our own galaxy, but let's stick to the neighborhood. Very exciting piece of work, but it does give you a sense of perspective. That's what they look like. Kathleen Martin, Betty's niece, and I did this. She did 85% of the work. Just came out a few years ago. She listened to all the tapes, did a comparative analysis, Betty's niece, who said what when they were in similar situations, and their testimony matches. It's a long, involved, exciting story. It's been optioned for a movie, which means maybe my great-grandson will get a chance to see a movie about this. I'm not much of an optimist about Hollywood. Well, Travis will tell you why. And there's Roswell. I'll go through this pretty quickly. The big noise about UFOs, June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold's famous site. Within the next 2 weeks, over 1,000 reports. Then the bombshell. Army finds air saucer on ranch in New Mexico. This goes to high officers. That's July the 8th, 1947. And it appeared, this story appeared in evening papers from Chicago West because of the time change as you move across the country. Too late for the East Coast papers. But loads of papers, and I've had some people say, well, how come it was only in the Roswell paper? It couldn't have been important. There's in loads of papers, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, I've got dozens of articles, Sacramento Bee, etc. Here's the Roswell paper. RAAF is not Royal Australian Air Force, which somebody tried to insist to me. Roswell Army Airfield. Which just happened to be the home of the most elite military group in the world, the 509th. Why do I call them that? Because they dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, and 2 more than a couple years later, or a year later, Operation Crossroads. Hand-picked officers, hand-picked men, very high security. Roswell has a 13,000-foot runway there, in case you're interested. Well, Area 51 is a bigger one, but yeah, it's a pretty good size. And the Roswell story is a long story. I was the original civilian investigator, and I say that real quick. I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Supposed to do 3 interviews because of a lecture I'm giving that night at Louisiana State University. This is in 1978. Did the first 2, third reporter, nowhere to be found, no cell phones back then. And I'm talking to the station manager. He wanted to do the interview, but he's looking at his watch. He knew the people who brought me to the station. He knew we had to do something. Out of the blue, he says, you know, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And brilliant investigator that I am, I say, who's he? He handled wreckage on one of those saucers you're interested in, and he was in the military. What? What do you know about it? Lives in Holland. Well, that didn't tell me anything. It's a good-sized city, and I've been there since to see Jesse, as a matter of fact. But he's a great guy. We're old ham radio buddies. You ought to talk to him. The reporter showed up, was busy all day. The next day from the airport, I was there a little early. I called information, talked to Jesse Marcel. He couldn't deny that he was involved. I found out later. His picture, his name were newspapers all over the world. So he told me his story. He was the base intelligence officer of the 509th. Rancher came into the sheriff called the base. He talked to the rancher. Commander of the base ordered him to take the counterintelligence corps guy with him, follow the rancher out, about 75 miles northwest. He was worried about who's spying. There's a highly classified group. They're the only ones who had atomic bombs in the whole world. So of course they're worried about spies. And one reason they're there is because of the isolation. So he and the counterintelligence corps guy go out, they follow the rancher out, they stay overnight in their sleeping bags, they go out and see the debris field, they bring back as much as they can in their vehicles, bring it in. The next day on the way home, he stops and shows his 11-year-old son who just died this past year, who handled pieces of the wreckage, who went on to be a medical doctor, pilot, flight surgeon. Great guy. I probably still have a few copies of his book outside. Everything else is sold. The kibosh came in less than a day. New story. First it was Army captured flying saucer, then it was General Empty's saucer. And pretty much that was the end of the story in 1947, mind you, until I got involved in 1978. With a colleague, we found 62 people connected with Roswell. The old-fashioned way, no internet. By 1980, the first book came out, The Roswell Incident. By 1986, our number was up to like 92 people. I instigated the Unsolved Mysteries program, which was seen by 28 million people. That was before cable was big, so just the 3 major networks, you know. Anyway, the Roswell story's been going strong ever since. It's a long, involved story, and if I had copies of my books, I'd sell them to you, but I don't. You can buy them by mail or by PayPal or whatever. It's a big story, it's an important story, it's not the only crash. You guys all know where New Mexico is. Roswell over here. White Sands, biggest base in the continental United States. Albuquerque. And Roswell's 200 miles from everywhere. Albuquerque, Amarillo, El Paso. It has had a couple million visitors. I say that for those people who are contemplating having your own museum. Go ahead. I know, you want me to get off the stage pretty quick.
We'll have you back.
I'll hurry through this. There's Major Marcel from back then. There's General Ramey on the left. He's holding a piece of paper in his hand, which when enlarged has been read and talks about a weather balloon, victims of the wreck. Everybody know of a weather balloon that had victims of a wreck? Makes no sense. I had found Colonel DuBose, who was a retired general. There he is, Tommy. He told me he took the call from General Ramey's boss telling him, get the press off our back, I don't care how you do it. I don't want you to talk about it again, and send some of that wreckage up here today to Washington. Never talk about it again. Harassed rancher who located saucer, sorry he told about it again, it's a whole long story. The Air Force put out my favorite explanation. They put out 4, case closed. This is the wonderful saga of the crash test dummies. Now, I talked to the man on the right. The Air Force couldn't be bothered. Colonel Madsen, he's dead now. The dummy's the one in the middle. And he explained to me that the dummies for the test to be meaningful had to be 6 feet tall and 175 pounds. And you notice the flight gear. Because when you're kicked out of an airplane at high altitude, the gear you're wearing, the clothes, affects the drag, the heating, everything. And incidentally, when these guys hit the ground, they often broke off arms and legs. Now, I'm sure every rancher in New Mexico is going to say, oh, the aliens are coming, look what we found. Oh, another little difficulty. None were dropped until 6 years after Roswell. Time travel for crash test dummies. I mean, that's typical of the kind of stuff you run across. I'll just mention there was a group set up by President Truman called Operation Majestic 12. We're still arguing about whether the documents are genuine. I say 3 of them are. I've got a book that I can't sell you because I ran out, Top Secret Magic. about Majestic 12. So I'll go through this. Names, places, etc., they're all in there. That is Truman's signature. One document, I was challenged by one of the noisy negativists. You didn't notice that it was in the small elite type. Of course I noticed. That it was in the large pica type rather than the small elite type, which is what the National Security Council used. I challenge you to find any other genuine documents done in the same size and style type, and I'll pay you $100 each, up to a maximum of 10 for 10 documents. He'd never been to the Eisenhower Library. I spent weeks there. I went there, make a long story short, I sent him an invoice after sending him 14 documents, same size and style type, and he paid me. He told everybody about challenging me and nobody about paying me. And in his files at the American Philosophical Society Library, there is no Friedman file. We corresponded for 20 years. I wonder why, Phil, I wonder why. Here's the book about Majestic 12, Magic 12. This movie's been optioned, Magic Men. Whether it'll get made or not, I don't know. Here's the Roswell Legacy by Dr. Jesse Marcel, the son of Jesse Marcel Sr. There's the crash at Corona. Recollections of Roswell, testimony from 27 first-hand witnesses. They're all dead, but they were recorded. Rules were debunkers. Real quick through some pictures. Up at the top in the middle, nice little UFO. This is Salt Lake City, Utah. Mormon temple there. Ionized air plasma related to a magneto-aerodynamic propulsion system, I say. Santa Ana, California. Just so you can see that there's something there. Off the coast of Brazil. Whole shipload of Navy guys. Pictures eventually released to the public by the president of Brazil. There's no cover-up. This is one of a number of CIA top-secret Umbre UFO documents. And people are telling me there's no cover-up, Sam, they released them. I said, can you read what's under the black? No, but... And people say, why don't you scrape it off? Because they send you Xeroxes, they don't send you originals. Another one just to prove. That's my favorite page. Deny and total. They couldn't find 8 words to declassify. But there's no cover-up. The NSA has released 156 UFO documents on which you can read 1 sentence per page. Everything else is whited out. Okay. More background, Dr. Shostak says governments can't keep secrets. Enrico Fermi, there's the Fermi paradox. So where is everybody, he asked. Very sensible man, the reason I went to the University of Chicago. I don't know where everybody is, but some of them are coming here. And some of them are from out there. There's the book. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk about some other aspects later today.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you very much. All right, folks, we're going to continue. We're going to take a lunch break. I would like you folks back here at 12:30. Just to let you know, our next speaker after the lunch break will have Mr. Stephen Andrasco, and then he'll be followed by both Mr. Noe Torres and myself, that will be talking about the 1955 UFO crash near Del Rio, Texas. And we're very fortunate to have Mr. Stanton Friedman back. He'll be having another lecture to share with you. And then we'll have a report about the results of the paranormal investigation that was done here last night. We also have Fire in the Sky. We'll have Mr. Travis Walton. They'll be sharing with you his movie, Fire in the Sky. After that, we'll have a lunch break, and then we'll have a follow-up with our keynote speaker tonight with Mr. Travis Walton. We have a lot of other events, so folks, take your break, and we'll see you back very shortly.